Sarah Mitchell, 36 years old, a wildlife conservation photographer working out of Florida's Everglades, was driving back to base after an early morning shoot. The sun had just cleared the horizon, turning the wetlands gold and silver, the air thick with humidity even at dawn. It had been a routine session, capturing birds and gators in the mist. Nothing out of the ordinary. That's when it happened. A small white shape shot across the dirt track right in front of her Jeep. Sarah's foot slammed the brake pedal hard. Tires locked, kicking up red clay dust that billowed around the vehicle like smoke. The Jeep skidded to a stop with only inches to spare. 2 meters ahead stood a tiny albino lion cub. But what stopped her breath wasn't just the sight of an albino cub in the Everglades. Something that shouldn't even exist here. It was the cub's behavior. The little animal didn't bolt into the brush. Instead, it turned and locked eyes with her through the windshield. Then, it let out a sharp, the desperate cry that cut straight through the morning quiet. Those pale blue eyes held fear. Yes, but also something urgent, almost pleading. Sarah killed the engine and stepped out slowly. Hands raised, she waved her arms gently, trying to shoo it away like any sensible person would. Go on, little guy. Get back to your mom. The cub didn't move. It took 2 uncertain steps forward, then broke into a run straight toward her. Before she could react, it reached her boots, rose on its hind legs, and placed both tiny front paws on her knee. The paws were warm. Trembling, it looked up at her and cried again. Louder, more insistent. The sound raw with need. Zara froze. Lion cubs this young never leave their mother, never approach humans, never beg. Her mind raced through years of fieldwork. This wasn't curiosity or play. This was a plea. Something had happened to the mother. Something bad enough that this cub had chosen to trust a stranger rather than hide. She knelt slowly, keeping her movements calm. The cub pressed closer, small body shaking against her leg. Sarah met its gaze and gave a single, deliberate nod. Okay, she whispered. I'll help. The cub seemed to understand. It dropped to all fours, turned, and started running down the track. After a few strides, it stopped, looked back over its shoulder, and waited. Clear signal. Follow me. Sarah grabbed her backpack, camera gear, water, emergency rations, flare gun, and locked the Jeep. She fell in behind the cub, heart already pounding harder than it had in years. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to be a simple rescue. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary tale of a lion cub's plea and the journey it sparked, drop a comment below. What time is it where you're watching right now? And from which city? It's incredible to see how far stories of compassion and courage in the wild can travel. If this opening has you hooked, smash that like button. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest of this incredible wildlife rescue adventure. Let's keep sharing these stories that remind us why protecting nature matters. With the morning sun filtering through the misty Everglades canopy, Asher dashed ahead across the open wetlands, glancing back to ensure Sarah kept pace. His small paws kicked up splashes from shallow puddles, the white fur standing out against the green rushes like a ghost in the dawn light. Sarah adjusted her backpack straps, her boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. With each step, the air buzzing with distant insect calls. Asher moved with purpose at first, his tail held high, weaving through patches of sawgrass that reached up to Sarah's waist, forcing her to push aside the sharp blades carefully to avoid cuts. The terrain was uneven, dotted with cypress trees whose roots twisted like exposed veins above the waterlogged soil, and she had to sidestep them without losing sight of the cub. As they progressed, the humidity built, beads of sweat forming on Sarah's forehead. But Asher showed no signs of slowing, his breaths coming in quick puffs as he led the way. The path opened into a broader expanse of marshland, where the ground turned firmer underfoot, allowing Asher to pick up speed, his body low to the earth as if following an invisible scent trail. Sarah matched his rhythm, her experience telling her to conserve energy for whatever lay ahead, noting how the cub's ears twitched at every rustle in the underbrush. They crossed a shallow stream, the water cool against their legs, Asher leaping over it in one bound while Sarah waded through. The current, gentle but persistent. Further on, the landscape shifted to denser vegetation, with mangroves clustering together, their aerial roots forming natural barriers that Asher navigated effortlessly, squeezing through gaps that Sarah had to widen with her hands. The sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows from the trees, and the heat intensified, making the air feel heavier. But neither paused. Driven by the urgency that had started this pursuit, Asher's confidence held steady for the initial stretch, his direction unwavering as he cut a straight line through the wilderness, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or paw at the dirt before resuming. Sarah observed his movements closely, her mind mapping the route in case they needed to backtrack, the faint outlines of bird calls overhead providing a soundtrack to their advance. As minutes turned into a half hour, subtle changes emerged in Asher's behavior. He began to veer slightly off course, circling a large boulder once, then twice, his pace faltering as he returned to the same spot a third time, his head tilting in confusion. The rock, moss, covered and half submerged. He became a landmark he couldn't seem to bypass, his small frame turning in loops that grew tighter with each repetition. Sarah watched from a distance, her breath steady, recognizing the signs of disorientation in the young animal. Asher dropped his nose to the ground, pressing it into the mud with desperate sniffs, his nostrils flaring as he searched for a familiar scent. But the efforts yielded nothing, leading him to halt completely and emit a soft, plaintive cry that echoed faintly through the trees. It was clear now. The cub was lost too, his initial certainty eroded by the vastness of the Everglades. Sarah approached slowly, her steps measured to avoid startling him, and knelt beside the spot where he stood frozen. She scanned the earth carefully, her fingers tracing faint impressions in the soil. Years of fieldwork sharpening her eye for details others might miss. There they were, subtle paw prints, larger than Asher's, belonging to an adult lioness named Nova. The marks heading north through a break in the foliage. The tracks were fresh enough to follow, pressed into the damp ground with clarity despite the surrounding chaos of roots and leaves. Sarah rose, pointing ahead with a quiet determination, and took the lead, her stride purposeful as she followed the trail. Asher hesitated for a moment, then fell in behind her, his trust evident in the way he matched her steps, no longer rushing, but staying close. Now, they were true partners in this quest to locate Nova, the roles shifting as human intuition complemented animal instinct. Forging ahead into the unknown depths of the swamp, Sarah's mind stayed focused on the prints, noting how they avoided deeper water pockets, suggesting Nova had been deliberate in her path before whatever trouble befell her. The northbound route led them through a series of hammocks, raised islands of hardwood trees amid the wetlands, where the ground rose slightly, offering brief respite from the muck. Asher's energy seemed renewed by the change, his tail flicking occasionally as he trotted alongside Sarah. His eyes scanning the horizon. They encountered a cluster of ferns that obscured the way. Sarah parting them with her arms while Asher ducked underneath, the fronds brushing against his fur. The air grew thicker with the scent of decaying vegetation, a reminder of the Everglades' constant cycle of life and renewal. But Sarah pushed the thought aside, concentrating on the next print, which curved around a fallen log. As they advanced, the canopy thinned, allowing more sunlight to pierce through, highlighting the tracks more vividly against the dark soil. Asher let out a low rumble, perhaps sensing progress, his pace quickening slightly to match Sarah's. They crossed another shallow depression, water lapping at their ankles, and emerged onto a stretch of open prairie grass, where the prints deepened, indicating Nova had paused here briefly. Sarah knelt again to examine a scuff mark, her fingers hovering over the indentation, piecing together the lioness's movements. Rising, she continued north, Asher at her heel, the bond between them solidifying with every step toward the answers they sought. The journey pressed on, the wetlands unfolding like a living map, each twist revealing more of the trail Nova had left behind. Sarah's boots crunched over dried leaves scattered on higher ground, while Asher's paws made barely a sound, his stealth innate despite his youth. They navigated a narrow channel where mangroves arched overhead, forming a natural tunnel, the dim light inside contrasting the bright exterior. Emerging, the tracks veered slightly eastward before correcting north, a sign Nova had adjusted for obstacles. Asher sniffed at one particularly clear print, his nose twitching, a spark of recognition in his posture. Sarah encouraged him silently, her presence a steady anchor as they delved deeper. The heat built steadily, the sun now fully above the horizon, but the drive to find Nova overrode any discomfort. They passed a stand of sabal palms, the fronds rustling in a light breeze, the tracks weaving between trunks. Sarah's experience guided her interpretation. The spacing suggested Nova was moving at a normal gait, not injured at that point. Asher's cries had ceased, replaced by focused determination. His small form keeping up without complaint. The partnership felt natural now, human and cub united in purpose. The search unrelenting, but now fueled by the cub's restored strength, as the trail led them toward a denser thicket. Sarah spotted variations in the prints, slight drags that hinted at fatigue in Nova's stride. She adjusted her course accordingly, Asher following without question, their alliance strengthening amid the wild. The north direction held firm, pulling them forward through the intricate web of waterways and islands that defined this unique ecosystem. Sarah's thoughts remained on the mission, each discovered print a clue, bringing them closer to the truth. Asher's trust was complete, his glances back less frequent as he accepted her lead, the duo advancing as one in their shared resolve. The landscape evolved subtly, from open marsh to wooded ridges, the tracks adapting to the changes. Sarah traced a series of impressions around a cypress knee, her keen observation confirming the northern bearing. Asher mimicked her caution, pausing to listen at unfamiliar sounds, his instincts complementing her knowledge. Together, they forged on, the real companionship evident in their synchronized movements. The search for Nova transforming into a testament to unexpected bonds in the heart of the wild, pushing north for another 45 minutes through the humid undergrowth. A swollen marsh loomed ahead, its waters turbulent from recent summer rains. The track Sarah had been following plunged straight into the murky expanse without hesitation. the larger paw prints of Nova cutting a clear line across the flooded ground before disappearing into the choppy surface. Each impression she had studied earlier told the same story. The lioness had crossed here recently, but the urgency and the depth of those marks suggested she was weakening fast. Every minute, counting against her survival. Sarah paused at the edge. The current, swirling visibly, carrying bits of floating vegetation past her boots. The marsh stretched wide, perhaps 100 yards across at its narrowest. The far bank barely discernible through the haze of rising heat. What made the sight tighten her chest were the dark shapes breaking the waterline. Several alligators, their armored backs and ridged tails floating just below the surface. Eyes and nostrils exposed like periscopes. They drifted lazily in the deeper channels, but their presence turned the crossing from difficult to potentially lethal. Sarah crouched, scanning the water for movement, counting at least 5 distinct forms. Though more could be submerged and unseen, a detour around this section would mean backtracking south, then pushing through thicker mangrove thickets and possibly another wetland arm, easily adding a full day or more to the journey. Time Nova almost certainly did not have. The cub pressed against her leg. Small, body tense, ears flattened as he stared at the same threat. Sarah's mind ran through the calculus she had learned over a decade in the field. Never interfere with natural processes unless the intervention was the only way to prevent immediate, human-caused harm. She had watched predators take down prey, watched injury heal or fail in the wild, always keeping her distance. But this was different. The trap that had claimed Nova carried the unmistakable mark of poachers. Wire snars, dug pits lined with sharpened stakes. Deliberate human cruelty that had no place in any ecosystem, letting Nova die slowly in the water or from dehydration because of that interference would be the real violation. Sarah exhaled slowly. The decision, settling like a weight she had known was coming. She would cross. No other choice existed if she wanted to reach the lioness alive. She scanned the marsh again, looking for the shallowest route where the current appeared weakest and the alligators least concentrated. A narrow tongue of higher ground jutted into the water about 30 yards to the left, creating a partial ford that might reduce the swimming distance. The alligators seemed to favor the deeper, slower pools farther out, perhaps avoiding the faster flow near the center. Sarah unslung her backpack, setting it down briefly to adjust the straps tighter, ensuring nothing would shift or snag. She checked her flare gun, still 3 rounds, and the small hand axe clipped to her belt, tools she hoped would remain unused. Asher watched her every motion, his pale eyes wide but steady, as if sensing the gravity of what came next. She knelt beside him, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder. "We go together," she said quietly, the words more for herself than the cub. Rising, she stepped into the shallows first, the water immediately cold, despite the heat, rising to mid-calf. Within a few paces, Asher followed without hesitation, his legs pumping to keep up, small splashes marking his progress. Sarah moved deliberately, eyes locked on the water ahead, reading the ripples for any sudden change. The current tugged at her legs, stronger than it looked from shore, pulling her slightly sideways with each step. She angled upstream to compensate, keeping her body sideways to the flow for better stability. Asher stayed close, sometimes bumping against her calf when the water deepened to his chest. Halfway across, the bottom dropped away abruptly, forcing Sarah to swim. She pushed off with her legs, one arm stroking while the other cradled Asher against her side, his head above water, small paws paddling instinctively. The cold shocked her lungs, but she focused on rhythm. Breathe, stroke, kick, counting each movement to maintain control. An alligator's tail broke the surface 20 yards downstream, a slow sweep that sent a ripple toward them. But it did not turn. Sarah kept her stroke steady, refusing to panic and create splash that might attract attention. Asher's breathing came in quick huffs against her neck, his claws gripping lightly through her shirt. The far bank drew closer with agonizing slowness, the water growing shallower again until her feet found purchase on mud. She waded the last stretch, legs burning, water streaming off her clothes. Her knees buckled the moment. Solid ground supported her weight. She dropped to the grass. Asher still clutched to her chest, both of them soaked and gasping. For a long moment, she stayed there, chest heaving, water dripping from her hair and clothes, pooling around them. Asher squirmed free, shook himself violently once they reached solid ground, spraying droplets everywhere, then pressed against her side again. Small body, shivering, but alive. Sarah forced herself upright almost immediately. No time to linger. No time to recover fully. The tracks were still visible on this side. Nova's prints resuming their northern path through the drying mud. She stood, wiped water from her eyes, adjusted the pack on her shoulders, and started walking again. Asher trotted beside her, without hesitation, his steps steadier now, as if the crossing had tested and confirmed their partnership. The marsh lay behind them. The alligators occupied elsewhere. The immediate danger passed. Sarah's clothes clung uncomfortably, chafing with every movement, but she ignored it. Eyes fixed on the trail ahead. The ground here was firmer, scattered with low palmettos and occasional pine, allowing faster progress. She kept her pace steady, conserving what energy remained while maintaining momentum. Asher's fur dried quickly in the rising heat. His white coat fluffed out as he shook off the last of the water. They moved through a stretch of open prairie grass, the prints clearer now on the drier soil. Nova's stride still deliberate, but showing faint signs of drag. Sarah noted each detail without pausing, the spacing narrowing slightly, the occasional scuff where the lioness had rested a paw too long. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and heavy, but the urgency drove them forward. Sarah checked her watch briefly. Mid-morning now. The crossing, having taken longer than anticipated, she pushed the thought aside, focusing on the next set of prints, which curved gently around a cluster of slash pines. Asher sniffed at one, then looked up at her. Tail giving a single flick, they continued without break. The landscape shifting from marsh edge to wooded hammock, the trail leading deeper into the interior. Sarah's breathing returned to normal, her legs finding rhythm again despite the ache. The partnership held strong, human determination matched by the cubs' quiet trust, carrying them onward through the relentless Everglades heat. An hour into their resumed trek under the blazing Florida midday sun, Asher's gait faltered, small legs shaking before he thudded to the ground. Sarah stopped instantly, dropping to her knees beside him. The cub lay on his side, chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid bursts, pink tongue lolling out as he panted hard. His eyes were half-lidded, the usual brightness dulled, pupils dilated from exhaustion. She placed a hand gently on his flank. His body felt hot, skin tight from dehydration, ribs more prominent than when they started. Low blood sugar was setting in fast. The long hours without proper nourishment, combined with the relentless heat and the earlier soaking, had pushed his young system to the limit. This journey was far too demanding for a cub his age. No matter how determined he was, Sarah reached for her water bottle, unscrewing the cap with trembling fingers. Only a few swallows remained, barely enough for both of them. She tipped a small amount into her palm and let Asher lap at it weakly, his tongue moving slowly, barely wetting his mouth. The rest she saved. Knowing it would not last long, she checked her pack again. Food was gone, every ration sacrificed to distract the alligators. She glanced around the open prairie, spotting a distant herd of white-tailed deer grazing in the shade of scattered pines. For a split second, the thought crossed her mind. A quick, clean shot might provide meat. She shook her head immediately. 10 years in the field had drilled the rule into her. Never take a life to save another, unless there was no other way. Interfering with the natural order that way would make her no better than the poachers who had dug the pit for Nova. She would not cross that line. Asher whimpered once, a faint sound that cut deeper than any cry before. Sarah lifted him carefully into her arms, his weight lighter than it should be, and started walking again, scanning the sky and horizon for any sign of relief. High above, a group of buzzards began to circle tightly over one spot a quarter-mile ahead, their black wings tilting in slow spirals in the Everglades. That pattern meant only one thing, something dead or dying below. Sarah changed direction without hesitation, carrying Asher toward the gathering birds. The ground rose into a gentle swell, the grass thinning to reveal patches of bare earth baked hard by the sun. As she crested the low rise, the source came into view, a large tapir carcass, probably a Baird's tapir that had succumbed to injury or illness days earlier. The body lay on its side in a shallow depression, hide torn open in places, the smell of decay already strong in the still air. Dozens of buzzards perched on the remains or hopped along the ground, beaks ripping at exposed flesh with mechanical precision. Sarah set Asher down gently in the shade of a nearby pine, propping him against the trunk so he could sit upright. She pulled the flare gun from her pack, 3 rounds left, and aimed high. The trigger released with a sharp crack, a red flare streaked upward, exploding in a brilliant burst of light and sound that echoed across the prairie. The buzzards erupted into the air as one, wings beating frantically, a swirling cloud of black that blocked the sun for a moment before scattering outward. They did not return immediately, the noise and flash driving them to seek safer feeding grounds. Sarah moved forward, keeping herself between Asher and the carcass, eyes sweeping for any lingering birds or other scavengers. The tapir was fresh enough. Still, some meat intact. No sign of major spoilage yet. She knelt beside Asher again, lifting him once more and carrying him the final distance. He hung limply at first, head resting against her shoulder, but as they neared the body, he stirred, nose twitching at the scent. Sarah set him down a few feet from the carcass, staying close to shield him from any sudden return of the buzzards. Asher approached slowly, legs wobbly but driven by instinct. He sniffed the torn flank cautiously, then lowered his head and began to tear at the exposed muscle with small, careful bites. The meat was tough, but he worked methodically, swallowing in quick gulps. Sarah stood watch, flare gun in hand, scanning the sky and the surrounding grass for movement. The sun beat down without mercy, heat rising in waves from the ground. But she did not move from her post. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. Asher's pace quickened slightly as strength returned, his tail giving faint twitches. At 15 minutes he stepped back, belly visibly fuller, eyes brighter. the dull glaze gone. He licked his muzzle, then trotted towards Sarah with steadier steps, pressing against her leg in a brief, grateful rub. She knelt, running her hand over his head. "Good job," she said softly. "Just a bit more." Asher looked up at her, then turned north again. The direction of Nova's tracks now clear. On the far side of the clearing, Sarah rose, shouldered her pack, and followed. The cub moved with renewed purpose, his stride no longer shaky. Energy returning in visible waves. They left the carcass behind, buzzards already beginning to drift back in cautious circles overhead. But the immediate crisis had passed. The trail continued through the prairie, Nova's prints leading into a stretch of denser hammock where shade offered brief relief from the sun. Sarah kept pace, noting how Asher now walked slightly ahead at times. Nose low but confident. The heat remained oppressive, sweat tracing lines down her back. But the cub's recovery lifted the weight on her chest. They crossed a narrow stream. Water, ankle, deep and clear. Asher pausing to drink deeply before continuing. Sarah did the same, scooping water into her hands and sipping what she could spare. The tracks grew steadier here, Nova's pace seeming to have slowed but not faltered completely. Sarah read the signs with practiced eyes. The spacing, even, occasional rests marked by deeper impressions. The hammock thickened ahead, trees closing in, providing dappled shadow that eased the strain. Sarah pushed forward, the memory of the fawn lingering like a quiet promise that even in the wild, unexpected mercy could appear. The journey continued, the Everglades unfolding step by step, each one bringing them closer to the end of the trail. Topping a low ridge 45 minutes later, Sarah halted abruptly at the group of about a dozen wild boars grazing ahead. The animals were scattered across a sunlit clearing ringed by pines, their coarse, black, and brown hides blending with the dry grass, tusks curving upward in sharp crescents. The largest boar, easily 300 pounds, with a scarred shoulder and thick neck, lifted his head first, nostrils flaring wide as he tested the air. The scent hit him, the unmistakable musk of lion. Faint but unmistakable even from this distance. He exhaled sharply through his snout, a forceful snort that carried across the open ground, then stamped one massive forefoot into the earth. The impact sent a small tremor through the soil, a clear warning signal. The rest of the herd reacted in seconds. Heads came up in unison, ears swiveling forward, eyes narrowing. They stamped in response, a rhythmic pounding that built into a low rumble. Hooves churning dust into the air, the boars began to shift positions, forming a loose line facing Sarah and Asher. Shoulders hunched, tusks lowered in preparation. Sarah knew exactly what she was facing. These were feral hogs descended from escaped livestock and Eurasian boars. Aggressive when threatened, capable of reaching 50 miles per hour in a charge and weighing over 200 pounds on average. Some much larger. A full-grown boar at speed could flip a small vehicle or disembowel anything in its path. Against that kind of power, a human on foot carrying a cub was essentially defenseless. Running was not an option. The ridge dropped sharply behind her, and Asher's legs were still recovering from earlier exhaustion. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a deep, insistent thud that drowned out the wind in her ears. For the first time since the journey began, real fear gripped her. This could be the end right here, in this clearing under the midday sun. The lead boar took a step forward, head low, Another snort, ripping from his throat. The herd tightened formation, ready to follow his lead into a charge. Sarah tightened her grip on Asher, pulling him closer to her side, ready to shield him with her body. If it came to that, she scanned the ground for anything. A rock, a stick, her flare gun still in the pack, but useless against this many. The boars advanced another step, the ground vibrating under their weight. Then, from the edge of the group, a small spotted fawn burst forward. It was young, barely weaned, legs long and gangly, but it moved with sudden purpose. The fawn leaped directly into the path of the advancing line, planting itself between the boars and Sarah. The lead boar skidded to a stop, head jerking up in surprise. The others halted instantly, momentum broken. Snorts, turning to confused grunts. The fawn stood its ground, ears pinned back, small body trembling but unmoving, as if it understood exactly what was at stake. It did not charge or threaten. It simply blocked the way, refusing to yield. The lead boar pawed the earth once, twice, then lowered his tusks and huffed again. But the aggression had fractured. The herd milled uncertainly, glancing between their leader and the tiny deer that had placed itself in harm's way. For a long moment nothing moved except the rustle of grass in the breeze. Sarah did not hesitate. She scooped Asher fully into her arms, turned sharply, and sprinted toward a cluster of large boulders on the ridge's eastern side. Her boots pounded the ground, lungs burning as she covered the distance in seconds. She ducked behind the first rock, pressing her back against the rough surface. Asher cradled against her chest. She slid down slowly until she was hidden, breathing hard through her mouth to stay quiet. Peering around the edge of the boulder, she watched. The boars remained in the clearing, still facing her direction. But the line had broken. The lead boar snorted once more, shook his massive head, then turned away. The others followed, drifting back toward the far side of the prairie, grunts fading as they resumed grazing in a loose scatter. The fawn stayed in place a moment longer, ears forward, eyes fixed on the spot where Sarah had disappeared. Then it bounded after the herd, disappearing into the grass. Sarah stayed hidden until the last boar was out of sight, the clearing empty except for trampled earth and settling dust. She exhaled slowly, the tension draining from her shoulders. Asher squirmed free and stood beside her, small body pressed against her leg. She reached down and ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the rapid beat of his heart slow. The moment had passed. One small life had stepped in front of danger to protect another. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a quiet rush of gratitude and wonder that cut through the fear. She rose carefully, checking the clearing one last time, then stepped out from behind the rock. The trail of Nova's prints continued north on the far side, undisturbed by the encounter. Sarah started walking again, Asher falling in step beside her. The ridge, now, behind them, the sun remained high, heat pressing down, but the path ahead felt clearer. The bond between them deepened by the narrow escape. They moved through the prairie edge into a line of scrub oaks, the shade welcome after the open exposure. Sarah kept her pace steady, eyes on the ground where the prints reappeared, faint but consistent. Asher walked with renewed alertness, ears pricked, as if the encounter had sharpened his senses. The landscape rolled gently, dotted with palmettos and occasional sinkholes, the trail weaving between them. Sarah noted subtle changes in Nova's tracks, slight pauses where the lioness had rested, the prints growing shallower as fatigue took hold. The hammock thickened ahead, trees closing in again, offering cover and cooler air. Sarah pushed forward, the memory of the fawn lingering like a quiet promise that even in the wild, unexpected mercy could appear. The journey continued, the Everglades unfolding step by step, each one bringing them closer to the end of the trail. Arriving at the track's end, near dense thorn bushes, 50 minutes on, Asher rushed to a deep ground pit and peered down. Wailing mournfully, Sarah dropped to her knees at the edge. Gripping the lip of the hole, the pit dropped twice the height of a person. Walls straight, cut and reinforced with rough timber. Clear work of poachers. At the bottom lay Nova, the albino lioness, sprawled on her side in the dirt. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular heaves. Ribs stark under pale fur, matted with dust and dried blood. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, tongue swollen from severe dehydration. She was alive, but barely. Sarah's stomach twisted. She pulled the radio from her belt, thumbed the transmit button, and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Nathan, this is Sarah. Emergency. Albino lioness trapped in poacher pit. Severe dehydration. Possible internal injury. Need vets and rescue gear. Sending coordinates now." Static crackled for a second before Nathan's reply came through clear. "Copy. Sarah, we have your location. ETA. 50 minutes. Hold tight." Sarah clipped the radio back. Already moving, she uncoiled the rope from her pack, tested a nearby cypress for strength by yanking hard, then looped and knotted it securely around the thick trunk. She checked the knot, tugged again, then fed the free end over the pit's edge. Without pausing, she backed up, wrapped the rope around her waist for control, and began descending. Her boots scraped against the dirt walls as she lowered herself. Feet braced, arms burning from the strain. Dust sifted down around her. When her feet touched bottom, she released the rope slowly. Eyes never leaving Nova. The lioness lifted her head a fraction, a weak rumble vibrating in her throat. Not threat, just acknowledgement. Sarah approached in a half. Crouch, hands visible, voice soft. "Easy, girl. I'm here to help." She knelt beside Nova's head, uncapped her water bottle, and poured a thin stream into the lioness's mouth. Nova's tongue moved sluggishly at first, then lapped more eagerly, swallowing what she could. Some dribbled down her chin, but enough went in to ease the worst of the thirst. Sarah kept pouring in small amounts, watching for any sign of choking. Nova's breathing steadied slightly, eyes focusing a little more. Then movement flickered in the corner of the pit. A large scorpion scuttled from the shadows, tan exoskeleton, gleaming, tail arched high, with stinger poised. It crawled toward Nova's front paw, slow and deliberate. Sarah's hand went to her waist, drawing the hand axe in one smooth motion. She shifted left, 2 steps, breath held, then brought the blade down hard. The axe struck true, severing the body cleanly. The tail jerked twice in the air, stinger flexing, then stilled. Sarah struck once more for certainty, separating head from thorax. The scorpion lay motionless. Nova watched the entire action, eyes clearer now, a low chuff escaping her throat. Gratitude, or as close as a lion could express it. Sarah exhaled, wiping sweat from her brow. She reached for the radio again to update Nathan when a sharp, guttural yip echoed from above. She looked up. 6 coyotes ringed the pit's edge, silhouettes against the sky, ears forward, tongues lolling. They had followed the scent of the dying lioness. Opportunistic as always, Asher stood at the rim. Fur, bristling, small body, rigid, issuing thin growls that trembled but did not break. The coyotes advanced slowly, testing, eyes locked on the cub. Sarah grabbed the rope and climbed frantically, arms straining, boots kicking against the wall for leverage. Muscles screamed. Rope burned her palms. But she pulled herself higher with every desperate heave. She crested the edge and rolled onto solid ground. Scrambling to her feet, the coyotes had closed to 15 meters, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Sarah yanked the flare gun, free, aimed at the nearest, and fired. The red streak hit the ground between them with a brilliant flash and bang. The pack recoiled, yelping. But within seconds, they crept forward again. Realizing the light carried no real sting, Sarah reloaded with shaking hands. 2 rounds left. The coyotes split. 3. Circling left. 3. Right. Tightening the net. She remembered the field knowledge. Take down the alpha, and the pack scatters. She scanned them quickly. One stood larger, thicker through the chest. Leading the left group, she targeted that one, steadied, and fired. The flare struck the big coyote square in the face. It screamed, reared back, and collapsed. Sarah charged forward, field shovel raised, and brought it down hard across the skull. The animal went limp. She spun, expecting the pack to bolt. They did not. The coyotes snarled louder, aggression spiking. A second animal stepped forward, this one leaner, with a jagged scar across its muzzle. It lifted its head and let out a long, rising howl. The others answered instantly, closing ranks around it. The scarred one was the true alpha. It lunged. Sarah backpedaled, shielding Asher behind her legs. The alpha closed the gap. Yavs open. Asher exploded forward. The cub hurled himself at the coyote's face, tiny teeth clamping onto the sensitive nose. The alpha shrieked, shaking its head violently. Asher held on, 4 legs wrapped around the muzzle, refusing to release. The coyote slammed sideways, smashing the cub into the dirt. Asher's white fur turned red with dust and blood. Body convulsing on impact, a small whimper escaped him. Sarah ran, scooping him up, cradling him close. The alpha recovered, blood dripping from its nose, and charged again. The pack tightened. 5 meters. 4. 3. Sarah backed against a thorn bush. Asher limp in her arms. She whispered, "Sorry and thank you," and closed her eyes. Sirens cut through the air, sharp, insistent. 2 jeeps burst over the ridge, kicking up red dust. Headlights blazing, horns blaring continuously. The alpha paused, ears flat, then snarled once more before turning. The pack followed, melting into the brush. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank to the ground, still holding Asher, body shaking uncontrollably. The jeep skidded to a stop. Nathan jumped out first, followed by 2 vets and a rescue tech. They moved fast. One team lowered a harness into the pit, secured Nova, and winched her up slowly. Another vet knelt beside Sarah, checking Asher first. Pulse weak but present, ribs intact, cuts superficial. They administered fluids subcutaneously. Nova, once topside, received anesthesia and an IV line for rehydration. The vets worked in quiet efficiency, confirming both would survive, though Nova showed clear signs of malnutrition and would need weeks of care. They loaded mother and cub into padded crates for transport to the rehabilitation center. Sarah stood, legs unsteady, watching until the jeeps disappeared down the track. Later reports confirmed the poacher's site had been raided. FWC agents moved in within hours, leading to arrests. The men faced 5 to 7 years under federal charges, heavy fines, equipment forfeiture under the Lacey Act, a real-world consequence for illegal trapping in protected lands. Sarah leaned against a tree, breathing deeply for the first time in hours. The pit lay empty behind her. The thorn bushes silent. The crisis had ended. 3 months slipped by in the steamy Florida weather, with Sarah making weekly trips to the rehabilitation center. The facility sat on the edge of the Everglades. Low buildings shaded by live oaks. Enclosures designed to mimic natural habitat while allowing close monitoring. Asher always spotted her first. The moment she stepped through the gate, his ears pricked, and he bounded across the grass, white fur flashing in the sun. Small body, low and eager, he reached her boots, rose on hind legs, and pressed his head against her thigh, rumbling softly in greeting. Sarah knelt every time, hands running over his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle that had replaced the frailty she remembered. Nova watched from the far side of the shared enclosure, amber eyes tracking Sarah's movements. The lioness no longer paced restlessly. She moved with calm authority, coat glossy, weight restored. When Sarah approached the fence, Nova would rise, slowly walk over, and press her broad forehead against the wire. Holding the contact for long seconds, the gesture carried weight, recognition, trust, something close to affection. The vets confirmed full recovery. Nova had gained the weight she lost. Her hydration stable. No lingering effects from the pit, except faint scars on her forelegs. Asher showed no permanent damage from his injuries. The cuts had healed clean. His energy boundless. The staff noted how both animals responded to Sarah's visits. Asher, more playful. Nova, more relaxed. The bond had endured the months of separation and treatment. Release day arrived under a clear sky, the air thick with the scent of wet earth after overnight rain. Sarah drove the transport van herself, Nathan riding shotgun. The crates, secured in back, they reached the designated release site deep in the Everglades. A vast open prairie bordered by cypress strands and distant hammocks. The same kind of habitat where the journey had begun. The area had been scouted and cleared of immediate threats. Radio collars fitted for tracking. Sarah parked, walked to the rear, and opened the first crate door. Nova emerged first. She stepped out slowly, paused to scent the air, then stretched her entire body, spine arching, claws flexing into the soft ground. The movement was deliberate, reclaiming space she had lost. Sunlight caught her pale fur, turning it almost silver. Asher followed seconds later, bursting from his crate in a rush of motion. He sprinted across the grass, circling wide, tail high, then doubled back to Nova's side, nudging her flank before racing off again, energy spilling out in every direction. Nova watched him for a moment, then turned towards Sarah. The lioness approached steadily, head low, stopping a few feet away. She extended her neck and pressed her forehead firmly against Sarah's chest, holding the contact longer than before. The weight was solid, warm, deliberate, the greatest expression of respect and gratitude a lion could offer. Sarah stood still, hands at her sides, letting the moment last. Asher galloped back, skidding to a stop beside his mother. He rose on hind legs, just as he had that first morning on the dirt track, and looked up at Sarah with the same pale blue eyes. Sarah knelt, reaching out one last time to run her fingers over his head, tracing the soft fur between his ears. "Go," she whispered. Nova turned first, walking toward the prairie edge. Asher hesitated, glancing back at Sarah, then followed. They moved through the golden grass, passing between scattered cypress trees, heading toward the low hills in the distance. Asher looked over his shoulder several times, pausing briefly each time, as if checking she was still there. Nova kept a steady pace ahead, never faltering. Eventually, the two figures grew smaller against the vast landscape until they crested a rise and disappeared beyond it. Sarah remained standing in the same spot for a long time, hands in her pockets, eyes fixed on the empty horizon. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and pine. Emotions churned inside her. Regret at the goodbye, satisfaction at their freedom. A quiet ache she knew would fade, but never vanish completely. She understood this was the right ending. The wild suited them better than any enclosure ever could. Later, back at the center, Sarah sat on a bench overlooking the empty holding pens, watching the sun drop toward the horizon. The adventure had changed her in ways she was still processing. She spoke quietly to herself, the words forming the lesson she carried forward. This adventure showed me that one act of compassion can bridge humans and nature. Rescuing wildlife isn't just about saving animals. It's about healing our world and ourselves. Poachers pay dearly, facing years in prison and heavy fines under laws. A reminder that protecting our environment benefits everyone. Let's all step up for conservation. It creates a legacy of empathy and balance for future generations. The words settled into the quiet air, carrying the weight of everything she had seen, everything she had felt. The Everglades stretched out before her, vast and indifferent, yet somehow less lonely now. Sarah stood, walked to her vehicle, and drove away. The road ahead clear. The story complete.